Welcome to the EZCODE Projects Series Toaster video number 1. In this video, we'll create our project directory and review what we'll be making. If you have not done so already, please complete the EZCODE Projects Series setup videos to create your default template directory that we'll be using for this project. Those of you that have done so may continue. Remember, just type as I do. Pause the video or slow down the speed when needed, or even stop it. Typing out the code physically will help you learn it, and the understanding of what it does comes later. So let's begin. Find your EZCODE Projects directory that you created from the setup series. Okay, so I will find mine locally. Keep it in projects. You should have an EZCODE directory and you should have a template directory. So here we're going to copy the template directory and we're going to paste it in the EZCODE folder. So we're going to take this one and just make a sibling to it. So for me, I'm just going to right click. I'm going to scroll down to copy. I'm going to select inside of here and I'm just going to paste. And there we go. We have the copy. Now we're going to rename the copy to toaster. Okay, so now open VS Code. So we'll close this out here, go down here and find our VS Code, which you would have installed during the setup series. And here's our window. Okay. We need to open up the toaster directory, so we'll go over here to the Explorer and we'll say yes, we're going to open a new folder, and the new folder is in projects, EZCODE, and we want toaster. Open. And then we have our entire source folder that we wanted. Okay, so what are we going to make? So what we're going to make in this one, obviously by the name of the title, is a toaster. So I happen to have an image of a toaster, not necessarily the toaster we'll be making, as this one has some nice graffiti on it and shading and all kinds of things going on. But let's look at the function of a toaster. So if you're not familiar with one, this is something that has heating elements in it that heats up soft bread and makes it more crispy. I guess it darkens it a little bit, makes it a little more crispy and crunchy and a little bit yummy. So to do that, there are different types of toasters, but most of them have this sort of selection knob here. And when you pull this down, it pulls the toast down as well. They're like on the little metal elevators. And then it will set a timer, and that timer will go off. It will count to however long this dial is set to. So the dial is the intensity. So the longer it's in there, the darker the toast, the harder and crunchier it gets. So there's we can see that we have a lever. So that has a position of down and up. So 1 or 0 if you want to think in computer lingo. And the dial here, it has, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 selections on there. So you can only select the far left, anywhere in the middle with the hash marks, or the far right. So you can't go anywhere else in there. So there's just 5 selections. So obviously the first selection is going to be some form of time. It's not going to be 0. It would be, something like a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds, who knows. But you're never going to put bread in, push the lever down, and have it on the first setting, and then the bread comes back up untoasted. So the minimum amount is going to be more than 0, and the max amount is going to be less than infinity. We don't want to keep our toast in too long, or it's going to become charcoal carbon. So there's that, and then you can see here there's some buttons on the sides, on the left and right. Some of these toasters have pre-selected settings. We're not going to involve ourselves with that this time. We're going to go not necessarily with a dial in the middle, but with a selection of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up or down, and then a toaster that kind of resembles this. And also, if you've ever seen a toaster and you turn it on, it gets very bright. The elements inside of the toaster start glowing because electricity is running through these wires that are bare, and they're allowing the heat from the resistive wires to dissipate out into the toast to heat it up. So let's, a controlled type environment, and programming is the way to go for this. This, probably has some timers in it, but we're going to do it through programming. So we're going to kind of mimic what a toaster does, and that is going to be our project. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out here. And now that we have an idea of what we're going to create, let's begin by creating the HTML for it. So go ahead and open your source directory. It's where we keep all of our code in here. So we have our code.js file, our style CSS, and our view HTML file, which we created during the setup series, which we use for every one of our projects. So if you haven't done that, again, please go and complete that. Now that we have, let's see, the view HTML open, we can see we have some default things in here. And remember, like all programming code, HTML is nested to provide context. And this means there are hierarchical relationships. It's a big word. I don't know if I can say that whole thing. But here you can see we have an HTML element. This is what we call them, with the left and right, or the greater than, less than and greater than symbols that are on the left and right of it. And inside of that we have a head element, and then we have a body element. You can see the closing tag and the opening tag. So this is start, this is stop. This is start, this is stop. And you know the difference because the stop always has the / here, right on the left side, which most elements have. You can see at the top, this one does not. And there are a few, of course, that you'll see that don't. But for most of them, there are, oh, here's a good example. The link is self-closing. It doesn't have it there. But head, so has a start and stop. Body. So just like if you're writing a book, you'd have a header, and then you'd have a body or a paragraph or something like that. And everything is contained inside of these things. So this is usually what you're going to see in the browser, and this is kind of some configuration. You're not going to see this part of the HTML, but it's going to be there to address some things in the body. Same with scripts. You're not going to see the script tags. They're just going to load the code. And in this case, any file we want to load, this is where we put them. We put a script tag and we say code.js, which is right here in this directory. So it's going to look in the same directory that it's found, and it's going to load the code.js file for us. And when it does that, just to go over that, it's going to run this function, and it's going to load whatever's in here into this name right there, the capital EZCODE, and then we can address it and use it. So that's just a quick review, and let's create our parent toaster element. So this is the element that will contain all the HTML for the toaster, but also be nested in our parent template HTML that's sitting in front of us. That centers our toaster on the page already. So that's what we have this in here for. This wouldn't show up. It's just a commented out line that says everything goes here. So this, we already have the CSS to center everything that we want to do, and we just put anything new right into this thing here. So we don't have to make this kind of what we call boilerplate all the time. We just can start programming right away. So I can leave that comment there, or you can get rid of it. And what we want to do is we want to open up a very generic type of element called the div. And we're going to add a property of class on this, and it's always the same. Any property of any element, it's going to be the name of the property, in this case class, and it's going to be an equal, and it's going to be the string, the quotations here. And we're going to put something in it. So in this case, we're going to say, look, it's going to be a CSS class, and we're going to make it up, and we're going to say it's called toaster, because that makes sense for what we're making. Now once I hit the greater than symbol here, it's going to auto-generate my closing tag, and then I can just hit enter, and now I've broken into the element, so I can add more things. Just makes it easy for us. That's what VS Code is supposed to be here for, to make it easier. And now we have to think about how we want to present the toaster. So you can think of this element that we just created as the outer shell of the toaster, or really even just the image of the toaster itself, and now we're going to put in the toaster. So we got to kind of think about how we're going to make it. I mean, there's no HTML element that's toaster. We kind of have to make that. So it's just like Legos or little building blocks. We're gonna build upon each one of them. And in this case, we have class toaster div. So we need a simple representation of the toaster so that we can turn it on and off with those levers that we talked about, as well as set the toasting intensity. So let's open the toaster div just like I did and add the following. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a few more divs here. I'm just going to get back up here. And the first one, the only way to really differentiate these things is by the CSS classes that we're adding. In this case, we're going to call this body, not to be confused with the element body. That's just a CSS property. We can make as many as we want. And then let's see, we open that up, and right below it, we're just going to make another one. And we're going to say, again, the more you type this, the more you're going to know you don't always have to add a class. So we're adding them now because I know we're going to need to style each one of these divs, and we need to address them directly. So if we wanted to put some walls or some color on this div, it's easy now because we can say, hey, CSS body, you're going to be blue, and let's say div class front, you're going to be gray, we could say. Now, just to complete this, I'm going to open up the I spelled that wrong, so please correct yourself if you did that as well. It's front. So we have body and we have the front. And that'll make sense when you see some of these things together. And inside of the front, we're going to put one more div for now, and it's going to be called class equals face. So this is going to be the face, and it's nested in the front, a sibling to the div class body, and we're all nested in the toaster. So we could just move this toaster around as we wanted to, and we would get the same type of HTML shape. So this doesn't do much, except for, let's just save real quick. So we have the icon up there that says, hey, changes were made. I'm going to hit Command S for my keyboard on a Mac. I don't know what yours is. Perhaps for Windows, I think it's Control S. And learn your keyboard shortcuts. It's the quick way to do things. So we can just save them here, or I could go up here and say, savey. Now that we have that, let's add some styling. So this is where the CSS comes in. This is where this file comes in, the CSS. And let's give it some styling here. So we did save our work, and we're going to open up the next tab of style.css file. And under the comment project CSS, add the following. So that's this comment here. This is just default that we use to center whatever we're working on. And we isolate it from the project CSS because we rarely need to change this, but in some projects we do. But for now, we're going to put it right down here. And if you remember any of the CSS classes, do you remember any of them? What was the first one? So we had a toaster, if you remember that class. And now for classes, CSS classes, they all start with a dot when we assign them in the CSS file. And we're going to open up curly braces. And now we're going to say something about the toaster class. If you've done any of the other projects, there's some things in here where you don't have to learn a billion properties. There's not that many that we just use over and over and over again. And you'll say right here, display flex. That's going to give us a different type of container. And we just want to say, well, now that it's a display flex container and it's got a flex direction, we're going to give it a column. So it kind of helps you by giving you some of those names already. We're going to give it a fixed height of 140 px. Oops. And then we're going to give it a width of 100 px. Okay. Now I'm going to give myself a little bit of space, and I'm going to go into another class, because just like the HTML was nested, CSS or cascading style sheets, at least currently in this day and age, is also nested. So now we can take the next class, and we made our own class of body. If you remember, I'm not talking about the HTML body element, which all HTML has, but this is a class body, and we're going to do something very similar. So get ready to type this out. Display flex again. So nice and easy. And the next one we're going to do, it's another type of flex property, and it goes with display flex. They don't all start with flex, but justify content center. So we got a display flex, justify content center, and now we're going to give a height again, and it's going to be, we're going percentages now. And just like before, we had px up there, which is pixel. So how many pixels are on there? That's going to be an exact amount. The 70% is going to be 70% of the height that it's contained in, which in this case is 140px. So 70% of that will be the height, and 100% will be the width. And then we're going to give a, let's see, background color, and we're just going to say gray. And then we're going to give it a border radius. Once again, you don't have to know all these. You will learn them as you type them over and over and over again. And just right here, we're just saying top left corner, top right corner, bottom right corner, bottom left corner. Should be something like that. I always kind of have to look it up, but each one is representative of a corner. If I just had one in here, it would apply to all of them. And there's some other rules that go along with this that honestly I never remember, so I always have to look it up. But for now, we have our body. And if you remember, what was the next one? So we can just go back real quick. We just did this one, and we can see that front is a sibling. So if we go back to style, and we say it would be right below here, like this, and we're going to say front, open curly braces for our class, and we're going to say this is also a display flex. You see how easy that gets when you learn it just once. And we're going to do a couple of properties you might not already know. One of them is height, and in this case the height is going to be 30%, and the next one is going to be width, and it'll be 100%. And then how would you know all these? Usually we just go in, I make the classes, and then I just go right to the browser and I mess around until I make the shape that I want. Fortunately, you don't have to do that right now. It would take a lot of time. So we're just going to type these out. We already got them figured out. And we're going to do a display flex on the face. This one has a little bit in here, so just keep going and pause when you can. Again, these are flex properties. So display flex, justify content is left to right or center on the horizontal, and this next one is the vertical, where it's align item center. And then flex direction, we're actually going to call it a column, which inverts what I just said before, but that's okay. We're going to give it a position of not that, relative. And let me scroll up here. So I know sometimes that gets cut off in YouTube, so apologize for that. So let's give it a top. And now what we're saying is the very top of the relative position that it's in, it's going to be negative 80%, and we'll show what that means here in a minute. We'll do a height of 180%, so that's over 100%, and a width of 100%. And then what do we need again? We need a background color. Get used to doing that one. And in this case, we're going to do the hexadecimal code for this, and it's the number, and we're going to go, or the number symbol, and then it's 404040. Okay, and you can see a color pop up for us there. And then a border radius, and here we're just going to use 1, so you remember what that means. It's going to apply to all the corners. So what does all this mean? We're going to go take a look at this real quick, and we're going to go through all these CSS. So I'm going to save the file. So I'm going to do Command S for myself, and you can see the icon goes away. And let's get this a little bit bigger in here. So if you got to pause anywhere in here, get a good shape of what this looks like and type it out exactly like this is. Now that it's saved, we're going to open up the code.js file and remove some default code that's in there. So I'm going to go over here to the left. I'm going to select our code.js file. And here we just want to comment out this greeting line. So we're going to go here because we don't need this now. And we're going to say, for me, it's command / and I can just comment it out. Okay, so now let's save this work in the code.js file. So Command S or Control S, or come up here with your mouse. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up the browser, and we're going to do what we always do when we're doing this sort of structure that we have here. We're going to load the view HTML page, which automatically grabs the code.js file. It automatically grabs the style CSS for us. This is what the browser consumes. It tells it where to look and go. So here it knows directly to look in the same folder it's found in and find the code.js file as well as the style CSS file. This is how the browser works. So let's go ahead and I'm going to just slide over here and I'm going to open up my browser. Okay, and we're going to go up to File and we're going to say Open File. And here we're going to find our projects, EZCODE, toaster, source, and then view HTML file, and we're just going to click open. And voila, we have something already centered on the page. Like I said before, this is what we set up for. We have something here and something here. So let's just right click and we're going to take a look at what these are. Okay, so here we are in the browser and we're going to take a look at what we made. If we open up the HTML a bit here, so we see our comment is in there for everything goes here, and then we see our toaster, our body tag, and then our front face. So we can see everything that's going on here, and we can select each element, and we can see the properties that we put on here. So it just disappeared there. There's that column. So we can mess around and you can kind of find out which each property is doing by just selecting the element and seeing the CSS that's applied. Here we're looking at the body, so some of these may or may not result in something happening, but you can see what they do by just kind of messing around this way. So there's a lot to go over in this, so play around when you get a chance, but everything that we have here did shape, our toaster. Body is looking good. Again, we're looking from the top down, so here we're going to put in where the slots go for the toast, and here on the front face is going to be our levers. And when I'm looking at this, when we started, we kind of went over a height and width, and then everything else was a percentage of our outer toaster width and height. So if we go in here and we just double these properties, let's take the height and we're going to say, let's double that. So that's 280, and then let's double the width. That's 200. We can see that we have a really nice scale. It looks the same, just larger. And if we went into there again and we said 560 and then 200 doubled is 400. Again, we got a really nice scale. And then if we took the 170, what was it, 140? So we're going to go to 70. And then here it was 100, so we'll go to 50. We scale down to a small little itty bitty toaster, and we can see that this is good. This is a good scaling going on, and let's see, anything to get back here, if you make any changes in here, you just reset, and we always freshly load our files, which haven't changed currently because we saved them. So this doesn't change any of the files. This is just here in the browser. So this is good. Now we have, we can see changing the width and the height is making everything else work well. And this is a good test because if we went in there and we said, well, this is 30px or 45px or whatever in width, these aren't going to change based on the toaster body changing. So, what if we want to make different dimensional toasters? We have little itty bitty pieces of toast and we have these large pieces of toast. When we're building something in the HTML here, we want to make sure that it does have a good scaling for everything enclosed in our outer wrapper, which in this case is the div toaster wrapper. So that looks good. So now let's just slide back over and continue our masterful building of our little toaster. And so we're going to go back to the HTML and let's add a little bit more things into here. So inside the body div, which I already have open here, again, that's this entire thing, opening and closing. And we're just going to say inside of here, and we're going to put a bunch of divs here. So I got a div, and we can always use the property. It's not mandatory, but we want to use it when we want to create a new CSS class, which we're going to. And now that I have this ports, I'm going to open up, let's see, the ports div, and inside of here, I'm going to, let's see if I had it in my buffer here. There it is. I'm going to make another one, and instead of ports, it's going to be called port. So ports plural is the parent container, and then we have port, and we're going to open up port, and we're going to put another div in here with a class, and it's going to have heater. Now all I have to do is copy. I'm just going to copy this and paste it below. So what do we have now? We have two identical divs of port and heater, port and heater. So we have to make one CSS class and it will rule both of these, port and heater. And this is going to give shape to our toaster. So let's just save this at the top. But once again, I have that icon to save it, and I'll just slide over real quick and we'll do a quick refresh just to show you nothing showed up. And you can, if you can understand why that is, we haven't applied the CSS yet. And the div by itself doesn't know how big to be, so it's pretty much 0. So it's not going to show up on the screen here because it doesn't have any size. So now that we've saved our work, let's go to the style CSS. And again, we're nested. So inside the toaster is where we put our ports. So I'm just going to scroll down here, and it was inside the body. So we're going to open up right here, and we're just going to make a little blank space in between. And we're going to say all the CSS classes, they always start with a dot. So we're going to say ports, open curly braces, and now we're going to type very similar things as what we did before. So it's a display flex. Let's make sure I get display flex here. A justify content is space evenly, and you can see that VS Code is trying to give us some examples of the values that are allowed for those properties. And then we're going to align items center. Both of these are flex properties. And then we're going to give it a height of 70%, so staying with the percentages, with a width of 95%. I'm just going to scroll up so you can see this. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. And now we're going to head down to, just like in the HTML, of the ports, we now have a port. And remember that applied to the two divs that we had on there. And we had a display flex. Sometimes VS Code tries to be a little bit too helpful, and it puts boxes all over the place. So I'll have to take those out one of these days. There is a configuration to do that. Justify content center. Make sure I get these right. We're going to go with a height of 80% on this and a width of 25%. Okay, we're going to give it a background color of black and a border radius of 5px. So what we've done here is we've given some size to the ports, which in these cases you're not going to see these things. Look at how helpful it is. And we have the port, display flex, align items, justify content. This is going to be the ports themselves, and we're just going to continue here because this will make a lot more sense when we can see it. All you have to do is watch what I'm doing here, pause when you need to, get your fingers working to type out what these are. Just like with handwriting, when the brain can see and do something at the same time, it'll record and get better at doing it. So background. Now you'll notice we can put different types of colors in here, and one of them was black that we mentioned before. So there's colors that are just by name, and then most of the other colors you can't give that many names. You can't say, well, this is, a slight change in redness, so we're going to call it, slightly brick or something like that. We don't have enough names for that. So the hexadecimal is a way to grab any color that we want. No one's going to memorize these things except for, white and black and things like that, things we use often. And I'll show you in the browser how we can get these as well. And then VS Code even has a way to go through here and you can, select which colors you want. But I don't want to change that. Oh, I actually did change it. So we're going to go FF5722 and upper or lowercase. So now we have our heater and we can save our work. So I'm just going to, I see my icon up there says please save, Command S or Control S. And let's return to our browser, and we always have to refresh, load our view HTML file, and there we go. We have our little toaster slots. And you can see, just to quickly go over some of the things on here, we had space evenly. So you can see the default is to just keep everything to the left, justified, or we can do, you can go in here and you can change different ones. So we have center, end, flex end, all these different ones, right? Space around, space between, space evenly, all these different ones. So that's fine. We'll just keep it what it was. Reload it to get it. And then there was the color of the heater. So let's just go in there and look at the heater color. And you can see what we can do here is we can open this up and we can select any color that we want. And you can see that's where we get the hexadecimal values. You can get them this way, or you can go online and look at different things, but this is the easiest one. You select the color that you want from your color palette. You can do, opacity on this as well, which is that extra 2 digits at the end, or you can do full opacity where it gets rid of the numbers and it's just the normal 6 digits, or characters, I should say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's great. So we have everything set up for this, and we can start adding our controls on the front. Okay, so now that we're here, we're going to open up the view HTML again because we have to build some structure so we can add some styling to it. We can't just add styling to nothing. So we're going to go in here and we're going to say, okay, the front face. Now we're going to want to open up the face element, and we're going to add in 2 inputs. And if you've ever filled out a form online, you're going to know what an input is. So usually you might put your username or password in there, but there's different types of them. So in this case, we're going to give it an ID, a property ID of lever. So that's the lever part's the part we made up. And we're going to say, you know what, it's going to have a class, and we're just going to call the class the same thing as the ID. And then this is specific. We're going to say type, and we're not making up a range. It's a value that's already there, allowed by the input. And this says, instead of being a type text, which I might fill in text, it's going to be a range. And so I'm just going to bring this over here a little bit and get some more area so that we can see this. In fact, I'm just going to close it out. If you don't mind, we don't need to get into the file system right now. So we'll give you a little bit more room here on what we're doing. It's a little bit too big, huh? So we have a type range, and then we have a few more properties that are specific to type range inputs. One is the minimum, excuse me, and we're going to say it's a minimum of 0, and that's the lowest value it can go to. We're going to give it a starting value of 1, and we're going to say that you can go as high as 1. So you can see, and then we're going to say you can step in increments of 1. So this means you can go as low as 1 and as high, or as low as 0 and as high as 1. And please start at 1. And then you can step in values of 1, which means pretty much you can go 0 or 1, which is what we want for our down and up lever. And then input is a self-closing tag, which you might see done like this, but we don't need to do that. We're just going to copy and paste and give a little bit of room in between the inputs because they're almost identical. So you can see that almost identical, but we're going to give a different ID. So when you're talking about a DOM element, so document object model here, this is going to be loaded in the browser. And if you have multiple IDs of the same value, whenever you search for them, it'll give you the first one. And that's not what we want. IDs should be very specific to one thing. Classes can be general and can be used all over the place. So we have, this is going to be the ID setting. It's going to be a class. It's going to be setting again. And then type is going to be range. That's the same. The minimum, however, is going to be 1. So if you remember, we're talking about the knob now. Now we're not using a knob. We're going to use a lever, but it's going to have 5 positions. And if you remember, the minimum had to be something other than 0 because you're not going to put toast down and not toast it. So we have to give at least some form of light toasting, and that would be what 1 is. And then we're going to start with a value of 1, starts there, and then we're going to say you have a max of 5, and you can step in that increments of 1. Okay, so what we can do now is we can save our work and just see what kind of structure we already got coming out of the gate with what we just put in here. So let's pause this video and make sure you get this typed out correctly. And then we're going to slide over, and guess what? We're going to refresh our browser, and there we go. So we have little front face here. We got a couple levers, and we can see this one is off or on. You see how it has steps only 1. And then here, if I just go over a little bit, 1, 2, 3, 4. It looks like we have 4. I don't know. Well, that's 1 all the way here. So then this would be 2, this would be 3, this will be 4, and this will be 5. So we do have 5 in general. And this looks a little bit wonky there. We don't really want it to look like that. So what's the next thing we need to do? We need to override the default CSS that's already there in the system. So this is the way it looks on Chrome. It may look different on Safari, Opera, all these other different browsers that might be out there, Firefox. And so we're just going to go back here and we're going to override because we're just building for Google Chrome. That's the one we're using. And we'll say, open up the style CSS. And if you remember, it was in front, face, and then we put it into face. So let's open up here and give it some context because we already know it has the context of front, face. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give it a lever class. Let me spell that correctly, lever, and then opening curly braces. So once again, we see that it's a class. We're talking about the class property, not the ID. If we were going to do ID, we could also target it that way. But we have, and we could do that. I just want to keep everything class based right now for the CSS for an understanding perspective. So we have lever, and we're going to give it position relative because we need to move it around a little bit. And if we give it a position of relative or absolute, we can tell it, hey, I know you're going to be here by default, but we need to move you over a little bit. So we're going to, in this case, we're going to say from the top of where you normally are, we need to go negative 45%, and that's going to move it up. And then we're going to say now you're going to have a width of 30%, and then transform, and we're going to do some CSS magic here where it has some methods already mapped out that will help us build different things. So transform, I gotta spell that right, that did help out. If you can see this here, we have top width, transform, rotate 270 degrees. And we're gonna see what that means here in a bit. And then we're gonna give it some padding. And once again, we can say if we have 2 values for padding or border radius or any of these other things, you can use different notation to describe the different corners, right? So padding, we can give a top padding, we can give bottom padding, we can give left padding, we can give right padding. So if we have 2 here, like this, what we're saying is top and bottom are 0, left and right are 4% each. And that works for lots of different things, like border radius or margin. There's a few other ones here. And now that we have the lever, we're just going to keep going down. And we had setting, if you remember that. Now we had a setting one. And the setting one's almost the same. It's position relative. Scroll up here for you. Now from the bottom, we're going to say, please provide another 15%. And then the width is going to be 75%. Okay, so we have our lever and we have our setting. These are both different, so they have different CSS applied to them. The next thing we're going to do is we want to apply similar CSS. And to do that, we're going to target the input element itself. So this means any input element. A little bit too helpful, just as I mentioned before. So we have the input here, and we're going to say, you know what? I know you have a normal appearance, but we're going to say don't do that. So appearance none. We're going to give it a cursor of pointer, and this is just, if you can see the pointer I have now, looks like you can insert text. You see that? This thing here, or it's an arrow, or it's a hand, and we're telling it to be a hand in this case. So the user knows they can kind of grab onto something. We're going to give it a height of 4% and a background color of 80, 80, 80. Okay, now that we have that, this is the next little piece that we have here. So we're going to use an ampersand because we're going to say the input, and this is a very special part of it, which should be how we target it for Google Chrome and Safari, but I don't totally remember that. So we're going to use a WebKit slider thumb, and this is how we're going to target that little circle that's on there. Now we're going to say the same thing again, appearance, none. So we don't want any appearance on there. We're going to make our own. And then we're going to say, oops, let's start with height of 20px, okay, and a width of 5px. Scroll up here. And then a background color of, and here again, you just happen to know, triple F is white. Now, just in reviewing this real quick, this is just shorthand. You know, we could have went in here and said this instead. We could have said input, WebKit, thumbnail, but because of nesting in the CSS, there's lots of shorthands because look how much typing there is to get these properties in here. So if we can reduce any of it with programming or CSS, we're saying input, and then it's saying, hey, whatever the selector was, just add it here for us. So it's really saying input WebKit slider. And we set appearance none, height, width. This looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and save. Just to make sure, if you've got all this here, you can pause at any moment to recheck what you got. Lots to type out here. Every time you type, you'll get better. So we're going to do a Command S to save, and then we're just going to slide over and we're going to check our work. So this is almost like testing our work. Do it, test it, do it, test it in the real world here. So now that we have this open here, if we change the toaster height and width again, what's going to happen to the levers? So let's go ahead and we'll just go through here and we'll say, you know, hey, toaster, let's see, we had, let's shrink it first. Let's go 70-50. And we can see this is a very big lever. Do you see the pointer, how it comes open? You can see that now. Got my little pointer. Now, this is not scaling. So we're like, hey, that would be nice to know how to scale these thumb levers. We already know that this is scaling right if we split these by half, but the thumb levers are not. So, you know, would they be 2.5 then if we did it in half? It would be nice to know if things were working the way, you know, we wanted them to do here. But we do know that the height and width act nicely together if we split them by half. They seem to be working really good together. So let's see. We did notice when we did double the height and width, the toaster maintained a good size between the two, and it looks like there is a relationship between those two things. So what if we could just set the height of the toaster and the width would just calculate based on that number? then we might be able to use some form of ratio to drive the size of our thumb levers, or perhaps we don't have to know and provide our width. We could just get it magically. So let's play in the browser console and see what we can discover about width and height relationship. So we're just going to open this up here. I'll click on the console. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to give some values of, so we'll say small height, if you remember it was 35, and small width was 25. And you can just watch here, you don't have to type these things out. We're just going to play around in the console with some math. And we have a 140. If you remember, that was our normal, so we'll just say it's middle. And then we had 100 for the width, and then we're just going to go large. Height is, I think it was 560 if we just kept doubling, and that width would have been 400. Okay, so we have these programmed into our console right now, and we notice that when we double sizes again and again, starting with 140 and 100 width, the size of the toaster still look good. So let's divide our height by width for each variable and see what happens. So if we took the small height and small width, let's just go ahead and do that. We'll say small height divided by small width seems to give us a 1.4. So what about middle? Whoa, middle height divided by middle width. And once again, we see a 1.4. So what about large height divided by large width? And once again, we can see 1.4. So there's a ratio, that's the relationship which is between the height and the width for our toaster. So we notice that this value is the same no matter what the height and width are. So let's call this value the ratio that represents the difference between the height and the width values. So if we divide our height by the ratio, what's that going to do? So if we said, well, we know the height of something, and we'll say, well, we know like small height, we know the small height is 35. And if we divide it by the ratio, what do we get? We get the width. So if we look up here, we automatically got the width of what we were looking for. Well, what if we had the middle? So if we took the middle height and we divided that by 1.4, once again, we get 100. And the same thing is going to happen for the large. We're going to get 400. So we have a way mathematically to manipulate and get values that are going to be together. So meaning the toaster is going to scale based on our ratio, which seems to be a good way of moving this thing around. And we're going to manipulate this in a little bit later in our code. So I just wanted to show not only here, but in other areas, sometimes you can look for ways and relationships between things, and that'll allow you to more easily program different situations in that might scale or change or do different things. Especially if you're in, like if we were making a toaster game and this toaster is going to move around and we had a bunch of different fields and we wanted to know where is this going to be, but we didn't want to hard code a value, we might be able to use some form of ratio or math to get around not knowing where it is, but knowing maybe one thing about it. Like in this case, we know its height, so we can derive its width easily, or what its width should be, by using the ratio. So just little tricks we can do while we're programming. And let's see. So if we divide our height by the ratio, we automatically get the width. If we wanted the height, then we would multiply the width by the ratio, and we could get the height as well. So once again, we're not just locked into the height. We could say, well, let's say we did know the width, and we're like, well, so we need the height. That's the one we need. Well, we can move around. So just in case we didn't know the height, but we did know the width, like it was inverted. So now that we know that, let's see, let's return to our style CSS and take it to the next level. Awesome. We'll start by adding some CSS variables. So let's just scroll back over here real quick. We're going to start the style CSS and we're going to do something I think is really cool. I like it. This is a really powerful use of CSS. And to do it, we're just going to scroll to the top because that's where we want to keep it. And we're going to go way up here at the very, very tippy top. And we're going to do something called root. And then we're going to open it up, curly braces. I'm just going to give a little line between here. And in the root, this is going to get loaded by our CSS, and it's going to get applied at the root level of our CSS for the application. So here we have some special things that we can do. We could do this down lower in our classes, but describing it up here allows us to use it in any class below. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, just like we had configurations or constants in our code, if you've been on any of the other projects that we've done, we've used constants at the top of the file in our code.js, and then we would apply a value, and then we would use that const throughout the program so we could get the value without having to describe it again and again. Same thing here with CSS variables. So I'm just going to make up what this is, be very descriptive. This is the toaster height, and we're going to give it 140px, okay? And then we're going to go to the next one, and we're going to say toaster dimension ratio, and we're going to say 1.4. Now we're not talking about pixels, we're just talking about a number, so we don't put a px at the end of that. And now we can do some CSS math, and we can say toaster width is, and now we can tell CSS to do something. There's some methods that are in CSS that we can use, and one of them is calc. And just like any other method call, you're going to have the open parentheses, just like in any programming language. And then to call our variables, we wrap them in another function called var. So in the var, we're going to say, hey, you know what? Take toaster height. All right, mind your parentheses here. So this added a little bit of extra stuff here. Again, it's trying to be a little bit too smart. And so I'm going to take the toaster height, just like we did in the console. I'm going to divide it, and we're going to say var toaster ratio. That's funny. This is something new that it's doing. So you don't even have to put var. It'll do it for you, apparently. And then we're going to put a semicolon on here. So just take a moment to pause it here. This is the time to type it out. Make sure you get all these correct. These all, you can always highlight over them to see. Make sure is this spelled the same? Yep, these are spelled the same. Are these spelled the same? Yep, because they highlight together. And then that gives us toaster width. So our toaster width is now derived from the toaster height and the dimension ratio. And now we can do a few different things. We can say, you know what? Now we can go down to the toaster body or the toaster class, and we can say, we don't have to describe them this way anymore. We can actually delete this, and let's see if it gives us, we want the toaster height. Yes, we do. And there it does. It does give us that var for us. And then remember, the toaster width is calculated, but it's already a variable. So we can say toaster width. And now we don't have to describe what it is down here. It's at the top. And if you took this even further, we can actually load this in via another file, a configuration file, or we can keep these values on a server somewhere in a database, and we can provide different skins if we wanted to per user, in which case we would just load these in, load them at the root, load the values with them, and automatically our CSS would digest these values that it's given to, as long as they're provided, and then it would shape our HTML. So this is super powerful, very cool. You're going to use this everywhere. And now let's confront the slider lever for the inputs. So the size of the slider levers are adequate for 140px size. So let's shoot for the current values. So what are we talking here? Let's go down to the summers down here. And we're looking at let's see, we need 5px for width and 20px for height, okay? of the slider lever. So let's divide our toaster width and see if we can get our values. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit more tricksies in here. And right here, we're just going to say, you know what, let's do a calc. And we're going to do the toaster width. So once again, it doesn't do the var here for me. That's weird. So let's go toaster width. Let's see if it did it there. Nope. So it doesn't down here automatically. And we're going to divide by, let's just go with 20. Now we have to use math and numbers, so we can't use 20px. But let's say we wanted to change this entire value into a px. All we have to do is at the end, when you're done dividing, add 0px. And in that case, we're going to get a px value. So let's do the same thing here. We're going to do a calc var, and we're going to do a toaster width, and then we're going to divide by 5 in this case, and then we're going to say plus 0px. So just make sure all you got to do is type this out, calc var, look at the parentheses, right? There's always nesting. Once again, nesting in the CSS, nesting in the HTML, nesting in our code. This is what gives everything context. Just like if we took someone's middle name, for example, or their last name, you could say someone's last name and there's just not enough context. So you can say, well, this is why we have, first name, middle name, all these different types of ways, or folder structures in computers. You can look everywhere in the world and there's always going to be a nesting sort of context. Just like in a tree with a bunch of branches. What is that branch connected to? It's connected to this branch. Okay, what's that branch connected to? It's connected to this branch. Each one of them gives a context to where it's located. So let's go ahead and let's see, we're going to save it. So let's save our work. So I'm doing Command S. You can do Control S if you're on Windows. And we're going to go refresh the browser and kind of see what happens here. So let's just go over here and we're going to refresh the browser. And it looks like something happened. I may have messed up. Let's go back real quick. I can tell you right now. Can you see what I did? And this is why I'm trying to keep things with height and width. So the width should have been 20. So go ahead and make this change with me. And so my notes were width, height, and my code here is height, width. So the height is the 5px and the width is the 20px. So go ahead and save your work again. Let's save it up. There goes our little icon. And let's just go back. So whenever you have issues, immediately go back and try and fix them, because if you keep going and you say, oh, I'll fix it later, you don't know exactly where it was. We knew exactly where this was because this is exactly where we were working. We're working with the thumbsticks here. So what does this mean? Let's see. Let's go into Elements, and we're going to go down to Toaster, and then I'm just going to open this up a little bit because we can go down here, click through the root and height. Okay, so we don't necessarily have. So if you remember before, when we were messing around and we were saying, hey, we had to go in there and say, what's the height? What's the width? And now I can just go in here and I can hit the arrow key, and just like a balloon in every aspect, it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And then if we go in there, let's just shrink it down real quick. Let's go to, what was our small one? 35? Let's see, 35. Look at that. Oh my gosh, look at, see those thumbsticks? They're not even, this is too small, mind you. We haven't really done any work for the borders, so they're getting too rounded off. And this actually looks like a little tiny happy character. He's got a little mouth and nose here with eyes. So we can see just by adding some more stuff, I don't even have to do the same dimensions where I have to split each equally. We can go, per pixel, and our little happy toaster here is just blowing up and scaling right. So you can see how we're designing this so far is we're leveraging variables in the CSS to control many different areas at the same time. And as well, we have our, well, that's it, really just the CSS with the variables right now. But we use percentages on a lot of the smaller items in there. So this looks awesome this big. I mean, this is almost, I can actually put real toast in there. So this looks fantastic. Let's return to our style CSS and see what else we can do with CSS variables. So here we are here, and we can look through. Let's just scroll to the top here because we can already see, we can start to take away, like, why couldn't we put different colors in here? So think of the different skins. So the height and width, those really aren't going to be connected to the skin because it's always going to be a 70% or 100% of whatever the height is. We already know that. So those are fixed. And display flex, justify content, these are fixed items. But the background color, we could absolutely put something in there. So let's go in here and we're going to say var. Now we're going to make up our toaster. There isn't one, so we're just going to make it up here. And we're going to say, now the way I like to do CSS variables is I give it a very descriptive name, the best I can here, with also trying to keep it short. And then I always use the actual property it's connected to, because if you see these in the wild later on, you might not see them in a CSS form. These might be connected to a JSON or something else. And we can see I already know it has to do with the toaster body and it's the background color property. So we just need to put a semicolon at the end of that. And then let's see, what else we got to do here? Let's see. Yep, we added all these later. So don't worry about adding these yet. We're going to add them in a little bit. So we're just going to kind of nuke through this thing and we're going to change all these things at once. So what was the next one? We had the body, we had the port, here we go. It was right here. So instead of black, we're going to say var, and we're going to be toaster, port, and then you know the rest, background color, semicolon, okay? And then the heater, here was another one right here. So we're going to take the heater and we're going to say, you're now var, toaster, heater, that port heater, sorry. So I got to go port heater, background color. So make sure you get those right. I had header with a D, that's not right. So toaster port heater, background to color, that's meaningful. And we're gonna go to the front. We got a bunch of stuff going on here. So let's go down to the front and same thing, we're gonna remove all these background or these different colors. So let's go var, toaster, front, face, background, color. And what's the next one here? We have the input. Okay, so we have an input here. And again, we're just making them on the fly. You don't have to remember them. I remember them. I have them written down here. And we have toaster, front, face, input, background, color. Okay, now we need to go right here and we're going to say what's the thumb. We're going to give that a background color as well. Toaster, front, face, input, slider, background color. Okay, now we've made a lot of variables and taken them out of our system, and we're just going to go up to the top now. We're going to add all these. So join me here at the top. Just make sure that you got all these correct. Slowly scroll through so you can pause if you need to. Toaster front face background color, toaster port heater background color, toaster port background color, and back to the top we go. Now we're going to go just below this a little bit, and I'm going to do one more thing and just move those over. Okay, so now we have all these. Body, background, color, and we're going to say that was gray. Okay, so we had toaster, port, background, color, and that one was black. And we're just going to go through these things. You can just wait at the end and pause if you want, catch back up. Heater, background, color, and this was FF5722. Toaster, front, face, input, background, color. And what was this one? This was 404040. Toaster, front, face, input, background, color. And this one was 808080. And then toaster, front, face, input, slider. Now, it doesn't matter how fast you can type. Every time you type, you will get better at typing. And also, 1, 2, 3 is what we used for shorthand, but it's really 6 digits. You can shorthand anything that has the same digits like this. If you've ever tried it, it's called typeracer.com, and it's a fun way to learn how to type something and improve your typing ability. So if you have time, TypeRacer is another way to do it. If not, this is perfectly fine. You never really have to type fast to program. You just have to type. Even if you got to peck around on the keys, it doesn't matter. It's just going to take you a little bit longer, and then you're still going to learn and you're still going to understand what this thing does. So what do we got here? Hopefully these are all correct. We could go through and say, we could do this. 1 of 2, great, because that means we got that right. We could say this one, copy F 1 of 2. I can go here and say copy F 1 of 2, and just to give a sanity check. I can already tell you, sanity check right here. What did I do wrong here? So I had toaster body background color, toaster port background color, toaster port heater background color, toaster front face. This is the one. So I got a little bit dyslexic on that one. Toaster front face background color. That's what this one needs to be. So again, this is why we test things. Okay, what do we got here? Copy paste. It should be just 1 of 2 because we only had 1 of 2 in there, and it's 1 of 2. And all I'm doing is highlighting, copy, and then I hit Command F, and it already goes into my find buffer, and it'll tell me how many there are. So that's good. We should have what we were thinking we have here. So I'm going to just go ahead and save this, and let's go over to the browser, and we're going to refresh. And you're probably like, hey, what's going on? Nothing's broken. That's what we were looking for here. So we still have our colors of orange. We have our colors of backgrounds, our thumb colors. So this is, and we can see to the right, our root, we can see all of our different values. And if we went in there and changed them, we could say we want it to be yellow now, or whatever we want to do. We have all this control over so much stuff so easily. There we go. So nice work, everyone. We created a good looking toaster that scales pretty well. There's our toaster, good looking toaster. So in the next video, we'll begin adding some logic to our toaster levers in our code.js file. So these got to actually do something. We're going to play around with that and make our toaster work. If you enjoyed this video, click the like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. Thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.